Hello.
Our story begins with Master Yoda, centuries before his ascension to the High Council. He was joined by his apprentice, the Spez, on a mission to criminal territory below Thifera. Yoda and his apprentice walked side by side through the walkway of the city. Their mission was ordered by the High Council because of recent criminal activity from someone referred to as Lady Kassur of Naboo. The individual was a local to the Mid-Rim planet, but their main operation did not come from Naboo. The Jedi were trying to stop the crime ring from spreading deeper. Aside from just participating in criminal activities, it oversaw a major hold on the black market, and there were new strands of drugs coming out that would poison large sections of the population. It could become a public health crisis. Essentially speaking, the drugs made the user sick, and then, like a plague, would make others sick. And logically one might assume or wonder why a drug cartel would want to kill their customers, but it's because, as found by a recently deceased Jedi Master, Lady Kassur of Naboo wasn't concerned in credits. She was taking territory. She came from an affluent family on Naboo, but her parents died of an accident, leaving her, the only child, with the inheritance. Lady Kassur, instead of utilizing her wealth for living prosperously, descended down a path of madness. Considering her parents died when she was around the age of 14, it was natural that she would react negatively. Regardless, she partnered up with Outer Rim gangs and rose to the top by killing off leaders and mob bosses with this poison. Her signature weapon was that poison, and she frequently ingested some herself, so that she had immunity. She drank blue milk with various bread types to prevent herself from dying by an assassination attempt. She had united various groups in the Outer Rim, and betrayed one of the Hutts, who saw her as an ally. She now held a majority of influence inside the Hutt crime family. Of course, that did put a target on her back, but as was reported by the aforementioned dead Jedi, she was planning to kill billions of people so that the crime rings could spread across the galaxy and encroach on Republic territory. She then planned to financially profit off the core citizens and slowly begin her pursuit of galactic dominance. She was only in her late 20s anyways, and she had made serious progress thus far. The Jedi here on Thifera were simply looking for an in, so that they could find a route to the heart of the cartel and cut the head off the snake. With centuries having passed since the Sith and Jedi Wars, the Order was prosperous. The Jedi were viewed positively by the government, population, and wider galaxy. This was the pre-Golden era of Jedi interaction with people inside the Republic, but there was still much work to be done. And thanks to an inflated budget provided by the Senate, the Order was permitted more access to more resources, so they could aid more people. Master Yoda and his 19-year-old Padawan, Venevra, spoke quietly amongst themselves. Due to Yoda having accomplished the training of another Jedi, he eagerly approached his instruction of his current student. He pushed her along, guiding her through her words as she attempted to start piecing things together. They stopped in a corridor of the city and searched the area. People passed by, some in awe that the Jedi had found themselves on their home world. The Jedi were regarded highly by the people, and it was felt. Venevra suggested they start with a local establishment or two, and Yoda followed along. They would visit a couple of cantinas, street bars, and vendors to ask some questions. People didn't snitch on the cartel, leaving the Jedi to continue searching. This was the struggle for the Jedi. Not that people didn't like them, but those in line with the cartel weren't budging, and those who were threatened by the crime syndicate were too frightened to ask for help. Master Yoda and his apprentice therefore abandoned the city and moved to another large city on the same planet. During their journey across the surface, Yoda and his apprentice spoke extensively about their mission. Venevra was worried that they might not find a resolution to it, and Yoda, while understanding, suggested that she find patience. If she could harmonize with the Force, they could perhaps find the individual that could lead them to Lady Kassur. Until then, he asked if she would like to practice some more meditative lessons, and she nodded. Being that Yoda was just beyond the age of 120, he yearned to teach more and more Jedi. He was considered quite young for his species when he trained his first student nearly a decade before, but the Council permitted it. Yoda was an overachiever in his early life. He was gifted with the Force, and there were many within the High Council chambers who believed that he might actually be the chosen one. These thoughts weren't shared with Yoda, but he knew that the Council thought highly of him. As a result, he frequently tried to be the best among their order. What he proposed to his student would be challenging for her. They had been training together since she was 12. which was also quite young for a Padawan. But as of recently, like now, Yoda found that she seemed to be more distracted. He could feel the excitement in her heart, as if something caught her eye. She wasn't like that prior to this year. Something had changed, and Yoda welcomed that change because it made his student unique. But he did worry about what could be the cause of it. Throughout their trip in a citizen speeder bus, she fluctuated from pure harmonized focus to distractedness. Yoda would catch Venevra staring out the window and stiffening her breath. Her eyes dilated with passing thoughts, and he watched her fingers twitch with excitement. She was fully invested in her thoughts, many of which he certainly could tell didn't revolve around their mission, which to Master Yoda was okay. Patience was the key to an investigation, as much as it was to instructing an eager student. Venevra was more aligned to the Order compared to his previous Padawan. She followed the code more regimentally, and she was someone he believed would find a seat on the High Council once she finished her own instruction of another. Time would tell though. When they arrived in the neighboring city, they followed the same steps, visiting local establishments before she impatiently proposed another method to finding the cartel. Yoda looked up at her with an amused expression, waiting for her to tell him. She thought that maybe they could be less charismatic with their approach. His head jolted to the side in a questioning manner, and she shrugged. They were too police-like. They weren't acting as a unit of the people, more of an overseer. Yoda understood, but to a degree that is what the Jedi were. Their alignment with the Republic was to be the representation of order and justice in the galaxy. She understood that, but it wasn't working here. Yoda allowed her to go forward because this was her mission. He designated it to her. He would do whatever she suggested. It would help him with understanding how much training she still needed. As Venevra proposed, they would be less upfront with their purpose in the city. They would get to know shop owners and be more personable. The citizens responded more comfortably, because there wasn't a direct fear of being taken away by the Jedi if they had cooperated with the cartel out of desperation or fear. Just as young Venevra had predicted, they would find a local willing to talk, leaving Master Yoda with a beyond prideful grin on his face. Before they began their discussions, Yoda had to step outside because he was receiving a call from Master Anakinskywalker of the High Council. Venevra started speaking with the shop owner about their struggles with the cartel, and Yoda learned that Anakinskywalker and his apprentice, Lesdar Stowe, were struggling with the resistance force on Iridoom, just south of them on the Rima trade route. Yoda informed the Master Jedi that he and his apprentice would be there to assist as soon as possible. Master Anakinskywalker thanked him and ended the communication. Before Yoda entered the discussion, he called upon the astromech that accompanied them to the planet, T3X1, to bring their shuttle to the city and pick them up immediately. The droid buzzed a couple responses before ending the call. Yoda would join his student inside the talk, and she would gather enough intel to learn that several shipments of spice and other harmful drugs were coming from Tatooine. It was apparently the heart of the supply chain, but there were alliances with the cartel through the Rishi Maze. The shop owner knew this because he had friends that did mining operations in that territory, and some materials could only be found in the Rishi Maze. For example, the spice ingredients, which were listed by the carriers, had tree bark used to stiffen the experience, only found on Yukio. The shop owner suggested that they take a look on those planets. They might have better luck there than on Thifera. This was just a stop along the way. As the individual expressed, the cartel didn't typically get their hands dirty. There were enforcers around the towns, but they didn't show themselves. Lady Kassar didn't like having her presence known, because it allowed them to lay low and put their product on the shelves and earn revenue without struggle. He did request protection, and Venevra looked to her master, to which he nodded, promising the man that the Jedi were in his service. There would be an escort sent to watch over him for the next 3 weeks. This was something the Jedi could afford to do. Their positive relationship with the Senate permitted them the ability to hire local authorities to secretly and quietly protect people in danger. That's what Yoda and Venevra utilized here. As they left the building, he informed his apprentice they were leaving immediately for the world of Iridoom. She asked why, and he told her that Master Anakinskywalker of the High Council was in need of reinforcements. They were struggling with some sort of cartel activity that had grown increasingly violent. Yoda noticed it, just as he sensed it, but she stiffened up a little, trying to not act weird about it. Venevra pondered if everyone was okay, and Yoda understood that they were all fine, just in need of reinforcements. The two of them entered the shuttle as T3 lifted the ship out of the hangar bay, and the Jedi took over the controls for the jump to hyperspace. The trip wouldn't be totally silent, but it would be a little oddly awkward. Yoda picked up on it and wondered if his student was doing alright herself. She was a little hesitant. Her calm demeanor was always present, even here, but she was on edge. What about? Eluded Yoda, but her response was that she was eager to find Lady Cassar of Naboo and bring her to justice. Yoda smiled and suggested that her eagerness be best placed into resolution. Lady Cassar likely wouldn't put herself in danger at Iridoom. Yoda almost spoke, but withheld his tongue. He reminded his apprentice, trust the Force. Through the Force and their gifts, they'd be able to stop this criminal regime from going too far. Benevra bowed her head with a smile, reaffirming herself and telling him that she would meditate for a little bit before their arrival. Once they landed, T3 and Yoda exited the ship alone. Master Olonkale was eagerly waiting with his translucent robes and a semi-arrogant grin. He'd been a member of the High Council since his mid-30s, one of the youngest to ever join. He reintroduced Master Yoda to his student, Lesdar Stowe. Yoda smiled, remembering the young man, an 18-year-old who respectively bowed to the Jedi Master. His smile was warm, and he towered over his own instructor, with his personal, darker robes. Olonkale and Lesdar were pretty much the opposites of each other stylistically. Olonkale wore aesthetically beautiful robes from some of the finest spinners on Coruscant, while Lesdar typically withheld an overrobe, just sticking to a thick black Jedi tunic. It was a cause of discussion between master and apprentice, but Olonkale was respectful of Lesdar's decisions, even if he didn't personally like them. Yoda asked for the intel, and it was quickly given. Another Jedi Knight had been killed out here on Iridoom, similar to the recent death from Thifera. Olonkale was awaiting approval from the High Council, but they needed evidence before permitting a full-blown Jedi invasion of the Outer Rim. Yoda turned to Lesdar, who watched his master speak. A few more details were given, one of which referring to the skirmish the two of them had had and just survived. There were 14 cartel members that ambushed them. All of them were killed, unintentionally. Yoda asked if they knew any other cartel locations around the city, and Olonkale shook his head. They were actively distributing supplies, but with the recent Jedi assassination, people were a little too frightened to speak about the cartel. Yoda was able to then reveal what his student discovered on Thifera, which perked Lesdar's eyes up. This is something that Yoda didn't see, but he sensed it. Olonkale didn't even have a wit about him to catch it, but Yoda was attentive. He always had been. With the details about Rishi shared, the Jedi prepared to continue their hunt for the distributors. As the High Counselor suggested, the recent ambush was proof that Lady Cassar was getting impatient with the Jedi. If they wanted to have any success, then they needed to continue interrupting her plans. Yoda agreed. Just as they prepared to start their trek, the Never Spez joined the three of them, and smiled with an overjoyed expression at Lesdar. The two masters walked ahead, while T3, Benevra, and Lesdar walked side by side. The two Padawans had been friends for forever. Spez had joined the Order late into her life, at the age of 4. She was almost not accepted, but the Order allowed it, just because she was close enough to the age range. Due to the age that she joined at, she was positioned with a bunch of younger students, one of them being Lesdar. They had been best friends their entire lives. They grew up together, trained, practiced, meditated, and so forth. Pretty much everything they did was together. Sometimes group projects meant for 4 students was just the two of them. They each, of course, had their own respective friendships, especially since Benevra excelled when she turned 10 years old, and obviously became a student when she turned 12. But that didn't separate the two of them. Once Lesdar became a student at the age of 13, a few years after his friend, they reunited. Much of their time together was just talking. There was something so remarkable about one soul recognizing its counterpart in another. That's what they were. They could always soul read one another. Even without their Jedi powers, they always knew what was going through the other's mind. However, it had become relevant in the last year or so that they were yearning for more of this connection. By being separated by their responsibilities and reuniting so infrequently due to being out of the temple at different times, they longed for what they had throughout their entire lives. Friends could come and go, but someone that knows or understands you the way they did was indescribable. Butterflies didn't even begin to describe the excitement that filled their bellies when they first saw each other here on Iridoom. And funnily, because of how thrilled they were to be by each other's side, they didn't talk much. They stumbled over words in goofy ways and kept darting their eyes to one another. As a result, the Never would make awkward conversation about T3 or something else random, and he'd follow suit by doing the same. They both knew what they wanted to say, perhaps even do, but that wasn't ethical. It was certainly not appropriate with their masters around. Attachments to this degree were forbidden by the Jedi Code. Both of them knew that. Even with his dark tunic, Lesdar wasn't a frequenter of the dark side. He didn't even use it. He just liked the way it looked on him. Neither wanted to disobey their Jedi Code, or the way, but they couldn't stop themselves from being pulled towards each other. In the same way that a planet yearns for the sun to rise, they needed each other. It was an indefinable necessity for what could best be described as life. Living life without the other felt impossible, and that was the tension encapsulated in these moments, here behind their masters. How do you find the words to express such desires without ever having personally known people that loved? The Jedi stripped those feelings from everyone, but it was up to the individual Jedi to maintain their own harmony and their own loyalty to such teachings. At a certain point during their walk through the city, the air became stale. The Jedi stopped and turned to people who moved for shelter. Yoda turned back and caught a glimpse of the infatuation that filled the Never's eyes, before seeing the same desire from Lesdar. He didn't think much of it, as he quickly moved around the students to see a grouping of 30 criminals coming from one direction, and oh, of course, another 40 from the other. Master Anakinskywalker didn't believe they had a chance here, but Yoda had other ideas. He stepped out into the middle of the street and sat down, crossing his legs. Anakinskywalker put both Lesdar and the Never behind him. Oh fun, now they were holding each other. Not by intention, obviously. I mean, who would ever do that? The criminals readied their weapons. Various creatures from dozens of star systems packed the cruise. It truly was a pirate band, and unlike on Thifera, they showed up in force. As it turns out, Lady Kassar wasn't very pleased with losing 20 grunts to 2 Jedi. She didn't anticipate another duo to show itself on Iridoom, but she sent enough cartel members to bring back the heads of a dozen Jedi. She wanted them dead. The criminals moved towards Yoda, slowly, as a multitude of others pointed their weapons at Anakinskywalker. His hand hovered over his weapon, as he tried to tell them to not think about it. He knew of Yoda's talents, but even at his comparatively young age, this would be too great of a challenge for Yoda. Master Anakinskywalker ignited his saber, as the students behind him followed in motion. The criminals still zeroed in on Yoda, as the Jedi Master harmonized with the swelling force. When the first pirate pulled the trigger, his eyes opened, and he flung into action, launching himself into the air with the ignition of an emerald lightsaber. Yoda landed on the ground and danced between his opponents, as the other 3 Jedi watched in pure awe. None of the pirates paid them any mind. Yoda was too deadly. The little green Jedi Master, in his young and vibrant years of life, sped between opponents, barely even using his saber to defend himself. He blocked shots back into opponents if they came his way, and danced away from anyone trying to fire into him. But most of the blaster bolts ended up hitting themselves, shooting their own feet if you will. Pirates fired at each other, trying to kill the Jedi Master, and finally with the Force, he whipped a few of them into each other. He grinned, maneuvering himself masterfully, without a hint of struggle. The thugs attempted to surround him, but he used their shoulders for defense, not even dipping his weapon into their bodies, as to allow them to be the decision makers of their own fate. Yoda leapt off the main group and flung his hand backwards, pulling a dozen or so off of their feet into the other group now approaching. The Never smiled with awe, and the other 2 Jedi were left in amazement, as Yoda, the young Jedi warrior, stopped every foe that approached him. His comprehension of his abilities, mastery of the saber, and ease of usage with the Force made him unstoppable. In his young age, he was awarded speed and maneuverability that was impossible for even the most able-bodied grunt to keep up with. Yoda whipped his saber around himself, deflecting the few remaining shots, as the last standing grunt fired a blaster, and Yoda stopped the bolt and lobbed it into the air, before raising his weapon to his own face and protecting himself. The guard stepped back, before turning and running. Lesdar called out to Yoda, suggesting that the individual would inform Lady Cassar of this event, and Yoda nodded, raising his hand, informing the Jedi student that she would be just as infuriated without the message. She would likely make a critical mistake as a response, according to this new first-hand intel. The Jedi watched the other bodies roll and swing. Some of them were killed, but a majority were just injured, simply by their own foolishness. Yoda put his saber on his belt, as Master Alonkale complimented him. Yoda didn't have a response, and he didn't need one. He just bowed respectfully and smiled. With so many to choose from, the Jedi would begin their work and start interrogating these criminals, as local authorities, with Jedi support, started to imprison those without valuable information. It would take hours. Most of the interrogations were being held by the Jedi Masters. This permitted Lesdar and Benevra more time to awkwardly stare at each other, as they searched for the real words they wanted to say. Well, she would make the first move out of impulse because she couldn't contain being quiet anymore. She told him how relieved she was to finally be within his presence, and he stuttered through his own words. It was kind of funny. For two people who knew each other so well, they didn't have anything to say. The connection of finally being in the presence of their other half was everything. The feeling was more than what simple words could ever hope to describe. Not even music could sing the tone of the emotions shared. Benevra, though, by starting their first true sentence about themselves, opened their comfortability with speaking. It also helped that Masters Yoda and Alonkale weren't nearby to make things more tense than they needed to be. The conversation started with their training. Both loved their instructors for varying reasons. Benevra believed she might make a knight in the coming year or two, meaning she could become a teacher soon. He was always the one who wanted to be a Jedi instructor, so this was said with playfulness, meant to entice a fake jealousy, which worked to perfection. Their conversation naturally shifted to their own lessons, some of their favorite moments, and of course, lastly, the thing that lingered on both their minds the most: who missed the other more. Well, that became the talk for the following few minutes. As Yoda and Alonkale had grueling interrogations with growingly impatient criminals, Benevra's master stepped out for a short break. He left the room and stumbled into a conversation not meant for his ears. Yoda was not physically visible, and neither knew he was listening, which made it unfair in his opinion. This was a sacred moment between two friends, who potentially had deeper feelings than typical friendships had. Yoda overheard mentions of adoration and longing and yearning that couldn't be fixed until reunion. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. He didn't want to be creepy, but he had to know the truth, so that he could best understand his apprentice. Through the Force, Yoda could feel warm hands holding onto each other, and visualize the smile from which his student spoke through. The synchronization of hearts, of course, couldn't be matched by anything he had ever felt in his own century of life. This was purity, it was beauty, and more than that, it was true love, one built from nearly 2 decades of friendship and cooperation, and so much more. Yoda sighed as he let it wash out of him. He had never been one for these type of emotions. The closest Yoda ever felt to an individual was when he held his master's hand at her death. He could feel the last moments of life inch closer and closer to darkness. But in that saddened picture, Yoda also saw the Force in its purest form. His master, perhaps the greatest friend he ever had, wasn't scared or afraid. They were comfortable in their final moments. Their hearts were beating at the same beat as they had when his teacher held him as a child. They were connected like stardust to the universe. It had been one of Yoda's most teachable moments, where he learned to harmonize with the Force in its most remarkable form. That was life and death, and yet for the first time he realized that true love and true attachment was just as beautiful and as giving as life and death. He leaned against the wall and tucked a tear back within his eye as a smile formed across his cheeks. The Force was such a wondrous gift, and somehow these two managed to find its most unfiltered state of existence. It brought him profound peace, because as he turned around to return to the interrogation rooms with Master Alonkale, he recognized something himself. Like it was with his previous student, who now crusaded across the stars with his own Padawan, it was with Benevra. Yoda loved his students. He never recognized it or realized it. In his own master's final moments, he felt a piece of that, but here and now he understood more than ever before. Love was the glue that held the Jedi Order together. It's what brought the universe closer and those within it into one galactic community. It was so perfect, and at the thought, Yoda understood that he loved his student. Venevra was like a daughter to him, same with his previous student, but like a son. And there was nothing more beautiful than the love he had for those he instructed. Their eyes filled with wonder and bewilderment as they experienced life for the first time, through his gracious training. Yoda returned from his small break with a completely new outlook on life as a Jedi. Now he had to determine if he wished to discuss it with his student or not. They'd eventually gather enough intel for an official move for the Jedi Council. Master Alonkale would just need to report it to them on Coruscant. So he and Lesdar were returning to the temple to meet with the council. He requested that Master Yoda and his apprentice float around Iridoom or perhaps begin scouting the Rishi Maze, though he did suggest that they stay here in case Lady Kassar sent reinforcements to the Rishi Maze. Alonkale also told them that extra forces would be coming for them. He requested 20 extra Jedi to join them here on Iridoom. Yoda would be in charge of everyone. This, more than anything, told Yoda that Master Alonkale planned to inform the council about his display of harmony in the face of danger. For the Padawans, they were left to bow to each other, leaving behind yet another moment that hadn't been captured. The kiss they both longed for, that now seemingly felt impossible to have. Lesdar would reap it the most, because she was staying behind in the Outer Rim, in the face of danger, while he returned to cozy old Coruscant, where the Jedi Temple would shield him from any threat. The bow would have to satisfy them both for now, until the next time they saw each other. Until news returned from Coruscant for their next directive, Yoda, Venevra, and T3 would move outside the city instead of going to the Rishi Maze, to keep an eye out on the city from the hills above. Young Spez was confused on why they would surrender the city, but they weren't. They were just keeping an eye on it, while also synchronizing with the natural force around them, something her master seemed especially persistent about. She listened, and when they reached the meadow, they knelt and began a meditation. This wasn't anything abnormal, and she had no reason to believe he knew anything. As they had with any other training exercise, they harmonized really easily. The force on Iridoom was wondrous. It was so abundant compared to home on Coruscant. It was here where Yoda also recognized something else. The temple needed connection, because without another individual or multiple, Jedi didn't have a central hub to connect to. The force of course swelled through Coruscant, but it was so frequently muted because the city built over the planet itself. The actual connection to Coruscant, the planet, was almost completely lost. With their eyes closed, Yoda began speaking, as he frequently did during these exercises. Part of him wanted to talk freely about what he accidentally walked in on, but he didn't want to intrude in her private life, or hurt her by doing so. However, with the exercise starting well and going smoothly, he, as her instructor, believed it was important to know the whole truth, so he addressed it. It didn't come off as inquisitive or pushing. He simply opened up the dialogue and promised that he didn't wish to prohibit her or anything. He just wanted to understand. This, for Venevra and Yoda's previous student, is what they loved most about him. He, despite his century of life, was curious. Knowledge was powerful, and one could never learn too much. In their connection to each other and the planet, he could feel the anxiety wash over her, and he told her that there was nothing to worry about. His honesty and transparency was her assurance that he wouldn't use this against her. The anxiety still remained though. She knew he wouldn't, that wasn't the problem. She didn't have the words to describe something so real. There had never been encouragement to speak about these feelings. Yoda opened up the avenue and gave her room to be herself. It took a little over an hour to reach that comfortability, but when it came, the words flowed naturally. It was divine in short, but she expressed her connection and even used the word love. That's what it meant to her. That foundational love and adoration chased her. Yoda asked her to explain how it felt in contrast to what she learned. This was the perfect route for her to ensure she was as Jedi as she could be in her master's eyes. But he didn't need to be convinced, and she also kind of knew that. Venevra told her master that, like the holobooks and recordings of Jedi from the past, she admired them, and she also admired her friend. She adored pieces about him that no one else knew. Who he was, what he hyper-fixated on, the way his brow curved at a statement he found to be funny. She described little moments of time stamped to the inside of her memory. These were just a part of her soul as they were a part of his. They were one, a unity formed by a chance in trillions, quadrillions, or more. What were the odds that they stumbled into each other, or that the Order allowed her to become a Jedi late in life, or that their pairing as students led to something so ravishing? She always had a way with words, but the romanticization of it put everything into perspective for Yoda. His student had found something that was everything she was. They were their other half. Without one another, they would be lost. That was the final sentence that ended their conversation. Their eyes opened and locked. He could see the tension in her amber eyes, and he asked if she was okay. Her head nodded, but she asked if she was in any trouble. She obviously trusted him enough to be fully transparent, and so he told her about that experience with his master in her final moments. It was true and affectionate. While yes, very painful, it fully helped him realize he understood love too. Without feeling the connection between she and Lesdar, Yoda might have been a little less sympathetic to what she had to say, but he couldn't help but be bewildered by the genuine attachment. He adored what she was able to have, and he promised her that he would protect it with his honor, his word, and his life. This tightened the bond between master and apprentice more. For tonight, they would speak about the stars until they both fell asleep, both more trusting in the other than ever before. When the morning came, they returned to the city. They'd have their own skirmishes with the reinforcing pirates, but the most important message would be what Lady Cassar of Naboo left them. One of the grunts dropped a care package, including a fume of spice that poisoned one of the locals, killing them and a few others within the proximity, nearly instantly. With some protection, the Jedi were able to remove the poison and extract the device. The dead would then be cared for by local medics. As for the message itself, Lady Cassar told the Jedi that they were encroaching on her territory. The further they went, the harder they pushed, the more people would die. If they left now, only half the population, theoretically, would feel her wrath. If they didn't, then the poison cloud she dropped would be widespread. As mentioned before, Lady Cassar planned on utilizing spice product to poison people and kill others near them through contamination, but she was also essentially threatening an all-out war with chemicals. She was giving the Jedi a date to decide. Luckily for Yoda and Benevra, they had some reassurance coming from Coruscant. Master Alonkale had gotten approval from the High Council to dispatch a unit of 500 Jedi Knights to the Outer Rim to investigate the Rishi Maze. They were also, thanks in part to a very cooperative Chancellor, able to reinforce their ranks with an additional 30,000 Republic Marshals. The Council would also have another 760 Jedi volunteers ready in the coming week, returning from their various missions across the galaxy. This was a huge approval coming from the Republic and the Jedi, but the evidence was present, and thanks to Yoda's work the previous day in battle, the Chancellor felt assured success by sending so many Marshals to the Outer Rim. Now, the Republic military wasn't what it once was. After years and years of demilitarization, the Navy and Army wasn't quite the force it was during the Old Wars, but these Marshals were still highly trained. They knew how to take cover and fire a blaster, and that's like half the battle too. The most important aspect about this deployment was the fleet presence. The cartel under Lady Cassar didn't have a large naval fleet. They had a couple of flagships, which were equatable to heavy dreadnoughts, so the Republic was reliant on its numbers for any potential space battles. The Chancellor did have one request though: avoid all-out war. This information was incredibly important to Yoda, who would soon be receiving his additional 20 Jedi. He and his student started working on a counter plan for how they might stop the cartel. She suggested something that might be semi-problematic, but if the Chancellor wanted to avoid all-out war, then perhaps there was a method to stop it. She told Yoda that they could invade the capital of the cartel. It wouldn't be safe, but it also would be the last thing Lady Cassar would expect. Yoda thought on this momentarily, and realized that Benevra was right. They needed to do it. When their reinforcements arrived, T3 plotted the course for them, and they departed from Iridoom immediately. Everything was too silent for the following few hours. Master Alonkale and Lesdar were returning to the Outer Rim with hundreds of other Jedi, including a few other counselors. The Republic Marshals were targeting systems with the most difficulty and displaying force. as Lady Cassar of Naboo listened to incoming reports across her minor empire. This wasn't a fully realized cartel. It wasn't massive or spanning. They were trying to front a power that they didn't have to scare off the Republic who had become complacent. Now, this isn't to say that the cartel didn't have a lot of influence, because it had most of the credits in the Outer Rim, just militaristically it was fragile. For a galaxy-like conflict, the first truly seen in generations, it was really pretty pathetic, but it left Tatooine open for an attack, which, as the Never predicted, Lady Cassar wouldn't see coming. Their Jedi shuttle slipped past the defense frigate, because it was a simple frigate and they landed on the surface. The people of Tatooine didn't expect to see Jedi on the surface, and it was even more shocking to see 22 of them. Ironically, the Jedi didn't need to search hard for Lady Cassar, because she was living inside the Hutt Palace outside the capital city. The Nevra kindly had her master rest on her shoulders during the walk, because she wanted him as energetically ready as possible. He didn't really want to, but she insisted. This was the kindness shared between master and apprentice. She truly adored him, and understood how hard it would be to traverse the distance in the hot sand, especially without shoes, because Yoda didn't wear shoes on Tatooine for some reason. As they closed in on the palace, they were confronted by an armed guard, led by Lady Cassar's lead commander, Iridoom. He raised his weapon and fired at the Jedi without warning. Yoda leapt from Venevra's shoulders, igniting his saber and blocking shots. This provided the Jedi, who didn't react fast enough, a chance to get out of the way and defend themselves. The Jedi Master used the Force to lob blaster bolts back into the cartel fighters, before taking cover himself. The Never asked if he was alright, and he nodded, asking the same to her, which happily brought the same response. The criminal scum littered the streets and prepared to gun down the Jedi. They were all waiting on Yoda's command, so he readily ripped the Force outwards, pulling down bricks and stones, laying a stronghold in the middle of the street. Yoda quickly communicated to his peers. They were going to take the street and the building side. They were outnumbered, but numbers weren't a game of skill. Yoda, in the middle of the flank, and with the Force, lobbed the bricks and stones across the pathway into several pirates. Iridoom rolled out of the way and fired again, as more Jedi came out, the other 10 igniting the weapons and engaging in a ranged attack. Yoda, with Venevra using the Force, lobbed himself into the middle of their lines. Because people were in danger, he cut through bodies and limbs. Yoda was calculated, and he kept a close eye on his student, who masterfully weaved her saber to protect herself. In this moment, probably not most appropriately because he was in a firefight, he foresaw her becoming a great Jedi Master. Perhaps the first of her kind, actually. Yoda flung another pirate through the air, as the Jedi from the roofs jumped down and cut through the remaining forces. Iridoom, in an attempt to kill the Jedi, detonated a bomb on his vest, and Yoda, again, using the Force, held the pressure together and lobbed him into the air, so that he could explode dozens of feet in the air without harming anyone. The Jedi picked up and moved on for the palace. At the same time, the Jedi at various star systems faced their own fights. The cartel wasn't strong and it had very little manpower, but they believed they were righteous rebels in the fight against the Republic. Lady Cassar, as she was about her actual strength, was bluffing about the chemical warfare. She was hoping to scare the Jedi off and start exposing the masses to her hard drugs. But it didn't work. The use of the chemical bomb on Iridoom was an early experiment that worked really well, but it wasn't mass-produced yet. Instead, the pirates and criminals gathered together to fight Republic marshals and Jedi. It would prove to be a growingly uphill fight for the Outer Rim scum. The fleets, on the other hand, had no issue bombarding and shelling the pirate frigates into oblivion at various locations. The only ship free from attack was the flagship at Tatooine. That hadn't been ordered to return to the surface yet. When the Jedi reached the palace, they saw the Hutt crime lord, that once presided over the land, strung up by its tail in front of the main entrance. With 22 uninjured Jedi, the freedom fighters following Yoda broke in through the main gate and started a siege. There were several grunts in the corridors, but none of them had the weaponry that Iridoom had, and they were only security personnel, basically meant to frighten the populace from rebelling. They fired their weapons inaccurately, and they were either forced to surrender or were cut down, as Yoda, trailed by his student, entered the main throne room of Lady Cassar of Naboo. She didn't look very pleased to see them. Yoda offered her a chance at surrender, but she refused, igniting a light whip, stolen back from a Jedi Navigator years before. In her back pocket sat another weapon for safekeeping. She swung the whip at the Jedi, but Yoda and Venevra blocked it. They kept their distance, further frustrating the mob boss. With an aggressive strike at the smaller Yoda, he moved out of the way and used the force to lob her into a pillar. Blood trickled down her forehead as she raged at the two of them, spinning the saber as it spun in various chaotic directions. They moved out of the way, but one of the rampant strikes wrapped itself around Venevra's wrist, pulling her downwards. The Jedi Padawan pressed her hand into the floor, and with the ignition of a saber-like dagger, Venevra pushed her hand down and leapt over Lady Kassar. As the Jedi student landed, she pulled her other hand from the whip and backed away from Kassar. Yoda tried to move in, but he couldn't. The mob boss jabbed her weapon at Venevra's heart, but she gripped her opponent's wrist and, utilizing some Jedi martial art techniques, flipped the dagger around and plunged it into Kassar's abdomen. Venevra pulled back and stepped away, flipping her saber into her hand with the force and staring down in shock. Yoda looked at his student, seeing that she hadn't been harmed. As Lady Kassar stumbled backwards, she yelled at the Jedi, telling them to damn themselves and their order and their righteousness. As the angry mob boss ripped the dagger out of her stomach, trying to take someone with her, she stumbled again and fell through a newly carved hole in the floor. Down below, a hungry Nexu was waiting for her and ate her alive. Her screams were hard to hear, but that was punishment for what she did to those who had already died because of her actions. Yoda and Venevra would remain on Tatooine for the following few days, as reports returned. There was one Jedi death on Tatooine, with about 27 others across various skirmishes and battles. Another 213 Republic marshals died in the fighting. Perhaps this was the least costly war in galactic history, but those lives meant something to someone. Lesdar worried about Venevra because of the reported single death from Tatooine, and she, of course, was concerned about the 27, one of which could be her other half. But they were alive, both of them. Lesdar actually had an injury, one that he didn't concern himself with because of his worry for her. But it was a pretty harsh injury, one that would have him to have part of his leg amputated. It was below the knee type of loss. Master Yoda would be reported by other Jedi for his heroics during the skirmish at Tatooine. His student certainly praised him, but he was grateful for all of their work, because it was a combined effort. Master Alonkale would be in charge of everything having to do with the Outer Rim, as marshals and Jedi Knights continued to dig up members of Lady Kassar's crew. Also, yes, the Nexu from beneath the palace would be returned to Saleucami, where it belonged. Yoda and Alonkale would reunite on Iridoom for the following few weeks, leaving Venevra and Lesdar to see each other again. They were so worried for the other that being together again felt like receiving a life for a second time. She asked about the leg and the story would be told, but they were both alive, united again. That to both of them was all that mattered. During this turbulent time, Master Yoda would watch the two of them periodically. It wasn't really his responsibility, but Master Alonkale would propose his appointment to the High Council, and for Yoda, he believed his student and Lesdar were the perfect inspiration for potential change inside the Jedi Order if he did become a counselor. Some thoughts and theories about attachment would be spoken about with Alonkale, which were surprising to say the least. Yoda was one of the most Jedi-like members of the Order. He was being considered for one of the highest positions in the Jedi Temple at, in his species, an incredibly young age. It's not that questioning or speaking about it would lose him that opportunity, but it left Alonkale with more questions than answers. Before they ever returned to Coruscant, with their permission, Yoda would tell his friend about the connection their students shared. At first, Master Alonkale was appalled. As a lifelong Jedi, it was against their code. As a counselor, he felt ashamed. But then, Master Yoda, who felt the purity, let his friend see it for himself and feel it. There was something about true love that was indescribable. Neither Jedi Master had experienced it in their lives, but they, right there and then, understood the attachment their Padawans held. Venevra and Lesdar were able to continue being with each other because of Yoda's and eventually Alonkale's protection. Being in the Outer Rim for the prolonged period of time allowed the young Jedi to delve deeper into their feelings. That same meadow where Venevra told Yoda the truth became their spot. A few other Jedi stayed at Iridoom during the same time, but they never learned the truth about these two. It was quite profound for Venevra and Lesdar to stay in the meadow and just experience peace in each other's arms. The irresistible pull towards one another didn't just make them better partners, but more adept Force users. They gathered at the meadow every day, after doing their tasks, and eventually, that's where they both mustered up the strength of that first kiss. Magical wasn't even a fair word to use to describe it by, but it determined for the two of them that no matter what, they wouldn't abandon each other, even if the Jedi Order forced them to leave. This was their choice, and that would become the challenge for Master Yoda upon their return to Coruscant after months in the Outer Rim. Benevra and Lesdar returned to their training regiments inside the temple, which could be hard or easy, but Yoda had a much tougher fight to wage. He may have turned the heart of Anakinskywalker, but he couldn't just do that with every Jedi inside the temple or the galaxy. He needed a little more than words to do it with. Well, following a new military Jedi amendment inside the Senate, basically affirming that the Jedi would have protected funding, and some other moves made by the extremely pro-Jedi Chancellor, Yoda had his own conflict. As a side note, the Jedi bills and amendments were protected inside the Republic, but they could be used for exploitation and even political manipulation. The Senate supported the Jedi, because they just started a new era of Republic expansion by defeating Lady Cassar. This package included a reintroduction to the Republic military, adding an additional 100,000 volunteers and a commission of a new fleet. For the Jedi, they got a larger budget to add new outposts across the Outer Rim. Regardless, Yoda, the new member of the Jedi Council, stood before a panel of what were now considered peers to make an argument on behalf of a student. Despite he and Anakinskywalker knowing the truth about their students, it wasn't something he mentioned in his arguments. Yoda was protecting Benevra and Lesdar, but also dozens, potentially hundreds or thousands of other Jedi that he might never meet. He reflected on people who came before them, who challenged the status quo by harboring attachment, and how those methods had proven to be ineffective. But Yoda believed in an order that could be willing to change. He referenced the Sith Wars of a few centuries back. He noted the Rule of Two that apparently wiped out the Sith with Darth Bane. The Jedi needed to continue evolving. They were productively doing that on the galactic front, but what about home? Yoda knew that he would outlive everyone in these chambers, but he also would outlive his Padawan too. She was so young and vibrant now, but it had crossed his mind since the skirmish on Tatooine that, like his master, he would be by her side at her deathbed. These were troubling thoughts for Yoda, and a great burden to bear. The Jedi path, as he told his peers, had given him the pathway to protecting himself and maintaining strength even in loss. But what about the life he lived between now and the time he left this plane of existence? Yoda personally didn't want any relationships, but hiding the attachments he had, not allowing himself to live fully as a student was, that felt inherently negligent. The Jedi needed to be at their fullest emotionally, personally, and physically, so that they could best understand the galaxy around them as it changes. It was through these emotions and instincts taught to his students that they were able to stop a potential Outer Rim uprising. Furthermore, they started an era of expansion by changing. They might not see it in these chambers, but Yoda might one day see a fully united galaxy, and for that day, shouldn't the Jedi Order reflect such changes? He believed in their cause, their code, and their mandate to the people, but what about their mandate to themselves? The religious sect often hurt its members by repressing emotions, subjecting themselves to emotional harm and mental disturbance as a result. The Jedi should be fortified as anyone else in the galaxy, knowing that they can fully express themselves as sentient individuals because that's what the galaxy needed from them. Yoda, for the first time since the Sith fell, motivated the minds and hearts of the High Council. His words spoke to their souls and promised them each a change that everyone could openly participate in. When questioned for moderating it, he suggested a scenario where they, like the ancients, mastered the emotions. The lightsaber forms, meditative strategies, life lessons, Jedi traditions, and so forth didn't come from nowhere. They took years and perhaps generations to fulfill. If the Jedi neglected it now, then a future generation might struggle with understanding its concepts. The purpose of every generation is to provide something new so that the future may accommodate itself without struggle. Their purpose today was to gift ease to a sunrise they will never see. This motivated a change within the hearts of his peers, and they asked for his example before they decided on going forward. He asked, in all of their wisdom, that they gift the individual's immunity in the circumstance that the council does not agree with starting relinquishing the attachment rule. They all nodded in unison, and the truth was revealed. Benevra and Lesdar would be the example the Jedi Council would monitor. They would be the base of what would forever change the Jedi Order. Their relationship wasn't made public, and they didn't even know the Jedi Council was watching them. Small moments with Jedi counselors would throw them off, but Benevra and Lesdar never thought anything of it. For several months and through several missions, the Council would come to understand what true, authentic love could be for two individuals. Their attachments didn't turn them into Sith. It allowed them to be better Jedi. Benevra, once she came clean about her emotions with both Lesdar and her master, opened up more as a Jedi student. She experienced the Force through a cleaner lens, and that gave her the strength to find means of accessing the Force that some Jedi might never find. The Council was overwhelmingly impressed. The fact that even in distance and in danger, these two young Jedi, both below the age of 20, understood where to put their unwavering faith, and it was impressive. They didn't buckle to anger or even frustration. They did experience pain, but that did not dilute them or turn them into vessels of the dark side. The Council overwhelmingly voted in favor of the new law, the new rule permitting attachment, and they called it the Lovers. Yoda would eventually, after about a year, be the one to inform Benevra about this new rule. It would be a little hard to learn that Yoda had been doing it behind her back, but she appreciated that he went out of his way to protect her and Lesdar. Benevra was very understanding, despite the fact that it was kept a secret. She and her partner were always protected, and now, for the first time in perhaps the entire history of the Jedi Order, they were allowed to openly love each other. For everyone who wished to share that experience, the Jedi were gifting it to their members. It would be taught and brought up in training, instruction, and for students to learn about it too. It would take decades of research and collaboration with therapists and psychologists, but it positively changed the lives of thousands of Jedi. In the coming years, after Benevra passed her trials and became a Jedi Knight, followed shortly by Lesdar, would get married. The Jedi held the ceremony in the Great Hall of the Temple, and almost every single member present on Coruscant showed up for the event. Master Alonkale, the one who proposed a proper binding agreement within the temple, would be the one to officiate the wedding. It would be a truly gorgeous ceremony, one that had some members tearing up, watching their best friends get married, others considering if they might feel the same way themselves. But overall, the consistent feeling was happiness. It lit the temple up. That same life Yoda felt was shared between every member, young and old. The Jedi had begun their progression into the future. Benevra and Lesdar were the example, but generations were to come. Even with Yoda presiding over the Jedi Order and the Republic entering a golden age, the Jedi had changes to adjust to. New threats were rising because of Republic activity in the Outer Rim. Jedi were also permitted to have children, but what did attachment mean for Jedi who formed relationships with individuals outside the Order, or those who desired more? Yoda may have created a new legacy of happiness, but in the new Lover's Law, there'd be more challenges that would face the High Council, and with it, the rest of the Jedi Order in years to come. And that, my friends, is part 1 of our story. Again, special thanks to all the Patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Quick couple notes on this. Part 2 will be out on Thursday. I'll do my whole overview of the whole story in the next part. But I hope you all enjoyed this first part, focused on a young Yoda and a couple of original characters for this specific part of the story. I do hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.